I've made great progress on my chaotic journey to try out every different flavor of Chaos Space Marines. I've painted almost every single Space Marine Loyalist chapter, and so now working my way through Chaos, I have learned a lot. I've worked through an entire box of Chaos Space Marines, including some of the unique Chaos Space Marines for the different first founding legions. And man, Chaos Space Marines have got me really, really tempted. They're like the Space Marines, but a little spikier, sometimes a little bit more interesting, sometimes a little less interesting, but usually a little bit more exciting. And it all started with this little Black Legionnaire. I don't even remember what I was doing when I painted this guy up, but I was painting up a Black Legion, and man, it turned out really, really good. I did some stippling and highlighting, all non-metallic metal. I got this little Chaos Primaris helmet on the stab through the backpack, and then the Imperial Fist shoulder pad with the nails stabbed into it. A little bit of blood splatter, this glowing, not quite lava, but really just more molten rock base. This looks so good, and man, it really, really started me thinking it'd be really fun to have a Chaos Space Marine army, to not paint my guys so clean and nice and proper, but just go full renegade. And so that got me started on painting up some Chaos Space Marines, and I have painted up a lot of them. One of the first ones I painted was, I remember this little Night Lords guy, the Night Lords trilogy. Soul Hunter, Soul Drinker, and People Eater. They have those names like that, but I don't remember them specifically. But if you look up Night Lords trilogy, it might be the best 40k novels. The Space Marines in that book, the Chaos Space Marines, the Night Lords in that book, are really, really interesting characters, which is very unusual for Space Marines. I don't usually love Space Marine novels because the duty and the honor gets a little oppressive. It makes the characters a little bit less interesting when you can kind of know exactly what they're gonna do. And the 40k novels don't really lean into the idea that these guys are all duty and honor, but that's not necessarily the smartest or the most interesting thing that they could be doing. Where the Night Lords, these guys are on an almost derelict space cruiser, and they're having a rough time. Everything is bad. They don't like each other, but they all have their own different ideals and things that they want to do and want to accomplish, and how they interact with each other and the humans on board. It's really, really interesting. I mean, in the book, there is the Night Lords, and one of the Night Lords takes what are they called? A navigator prisoner. And this navigator, later on in the book, she's essentially a slave on board this ship, but she looks back on her life before the Night Lords and then post Night Lords. And she's like, living with the Night Lords and being their navigator is kind of the life that I had hoped for myself, as opposed to the horrible, like she was just a navigator on some generic like barge, like cargo barge in her Imperium life, but now working for Chaos. Like her life is kind of in a way gotten better, even though it's worse. It's a really, really interesting book series. I like the Night Lords a lot. Doing this little lightning, I bought some copper wire that is really incredibly bendable and posable. And so I really like the arcing lightning coming off of the weapons. This, to me, is how I envision Night Lord's armor, because it's blue with the lightning bolts, and the lightning bolts seem kind of lame. It's like a little kid putting race car stickers like on his room, on the walls, and so it just seems silly to me, but having it actually be arcing electricity, that seems a little bit cooler. And so the Night Lords are interesting, but I don't think that they're the Chaos Space Marine chapter for me, because I wouldn't want to paint an entire army of mostly blue. Then I started to think about my love of the color pink and some Emperor's Children. Sean is working on putting together an Emperor's Children army, and so I'm kind of living vicariously through him. But instead of the Games Workshop box art, which is a lot of black with a little bit of pink, I like all pink. And I put together this little guy with a fair bit of kit bashing. I made his shoulders really, really tall and gave him buggy eyes and a sickly tongue. And this was a really fun model to paint. Similarly to my Black Legion, I did non-metallic metal everything. And the pink and the blue is so simple, but it is so striking and interesting looking. I really, really like the Emperor's Children. Honestly, I'm not super tempted by the actual Emperor's Children army, but I would be tempted to run vanilla Chaos in Emperor's Children colors. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a Emperor's Children army. It could just be Chaos Space Marines who have allied themselves to the god Slaanesh, and so that is how I get away with the pink. It doesn't necessarily have to be the 3rd Legion. And non-metallic metal looks really good on Chaos Space Marines. But speaking of metallics, one very metallic Space Marine chapter, or Chaos Space Marine chapter, is these guys. Taking a page from Dave from Tabletop Time and the Alpha Legion. I never really looked that hard at the Alpha Legion, but they're actually really, really cool. I like their lore, I like their sneakiness, and I like that they're a mystery in 40k that is still a mystery. Omegon and his twin brother, not Alfarius, is it? No, it's Alfarius and Omegon, which are the 2 Primarchs in one. Nobody knows what they're up to. Like, are they loyalist? Are they traitor? They're definitely traitor, but they don't feel super traitor. And nobody knows like what they want in the galaxy. But they're one of the leading causes of chaos cults because they'll just show up on a planet and start a bunch of cults so that in 300 years, there's chaos cults on the planet to do something. And sometimes that something will be like losing an important battle so that the Imperium can win. Like the Alpha Legion is actually a weird, sinister little mystery in the 40k universe that is still a mystery. My personal headcanon is Alfarius and Omegon, the Primarchs, never existed. And it was always just a grand conspiracy because even though technically Alfarius or Omegon or both or neither of them are dead right now in the 40k universe, but every single Alpha Legionnaire just says, I am Alfarius or I am Omegon. And so nobody knows like what is going on. I like to think it was just a great conspiracy. And one day it'll be revealed that the conspiracy will be revealed and it'll be revealed that they have Dorn as their prisoner because the Primarch Rogel Dorn is dead canonically, but really the only evidence of that is they have his hand and the Imperial Fist literally pray to his hand. But if you're not literally vaporized or beheaded in 40k, you're probably still alive. It's Star Wars rules. You can be thrown down a pit and explode, but 5 movies later or 3 movies later, you'll be back. I had a lot of fun painting up the Alpha Legion. Super, super simple to paint. Paint them silver, put on some candy colors to make them that kind of glittery turquoise color. I really, really like them. The black backpacks, it all works really, really nicely. If Dave wasn't doing the Alpha Legion, I would be tempted to do the Alpha Legion because you can also spam las cannons so hard in a Chaos Space Marine army. And I think a Chaos Space Marine army in this color scheme with so many las cannons would be so much fun to run. But I don't think I can do the Alpha Legion. Another chapter that I took a little peek at is a very lesser known Chaos Space Marine warband, and that is the Sons of Malice. I found these guys in one of the old Chaos Space Marine codexes, and just black and white Space Marines are really, really interesting. And I feel like it gets more and more interesting as you add to your army. Like a Land Raiders and Rhinos in black and white, Forge Fiends and Mauler Fiends in like cut in half black and white. It would be so unique and so different. Typically, a Space Marine army is a color. But these guys are the absence of color. It's black and white, just value. And then you throw in a little bit of color by just splashing them with blood to make them chaotic. I would be tempted by a Sons of Malice army because, man, would that be striking on the tabletop. Like, I feel like not a lot of people know about the Sons of Malice. And so when my opponents see an army across the table that is black and white, they'd be like, what even is that? It's the Sons of Malice. Also, a really fun Space Marine chapter to paint because it's just value. And so you're just working with black and white. And so it kind of takes a little bit of the fussiness out of painting because you're not worrying about how colors are interacting or the temperatures of the different colors interacting. Just worrying about the color or the lack thereof of color. Sons of Malice, really, really interesting Space Marines. But speaking of interesting Chaos Space Marines, One legion that I know very well is the Death Guard. I am collecting a Death Guard army. I have a very unique paint scheme that I use for my Death Guard. It's a kaleidoscope of yucky colors all over every single miniature, but I decided to give kind of more generic Death Guard a try, and so I painted this guy up using a lot of enamels, and man, it painted up really, really quickly and really, really easily. I could do an army of these guys really quickly and it would turn out so good. And the enamels were really, really fun to play with. It's a really, really fun way to paint because you just base coat things. And then the base coating really doesn't take that long, especially when you're not trying to do a particularly good job, because the enamels are just gonna kind of take care of all of that for you. And so I just base coat the white armor, base coat the trim gold, base coat the shoulders green, base coat actually I barely even base coated like his flesh and tentacles and pustules. I just kind of left them primer, and then boom, enamels done. And playing around with the enamels is really, really fun. Like classic, this is more of a 30k heresy scheme than a 40k scheme because Death Guard are typically green. Even all of their like successor warbands and stuff are just green, but different shades of green. I think white looks really, really striking for the Death Guard. And so I'm gonna paint up my Death Guard the way I paint my Death Guard. I love how weird and colorful they are. Takes a little bit of a while to paint, but that's okay. I've got years to get my Death Guard army done, just like it's taken me years to get almost 1,000 points painted, but it was really fun to paint up in a regular old Death Guard. I also did some kit bashing to make him a little bit more heresy as opposed to the more grotesque 40k stylings. But speaking of a Chaos Space Marine faction that Games Workshop actually has a unique model range for, the 1,000 Suns. I do not like the 1,000 Suns because Sean plays the 1,000 Suns, and they're really annoying to play against. Their version of magic is just dealing tons and tons of mortal wounds. And so it's like I'm not even playing the game. Eventually Sean is just rolling, and then says, all right, 7 mortal wounds. You guys just die. Now I shoot with these guys, and guess what's about to happen? More mortal wounds. It's annoying, but the models are really cool. They have this Egyptian theme going on, and I don't love the Games Workshop box art of just blue with gold trim, and so I did a little something where I did a gradient from magenta to a dark blue, and then I used very desaturated gold for the trim so that I had as much contrast as possible between the darker, warmer colors on his body and then colder colors for the trim. And I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. I also used green stuff to make his eyeballs bigger because the tricky thing with painting glowing effects is you kind of have to take in physics to get them to really show up the way you want them to, because if the eye socket is really sunken and is a hole in the Space Marine's helmet, it's always gonna be in shadow even if you paint it with pure white. And so bumping that lens out of his face lets me get them a little bit more glowy and let me get the look that I'm actually trying to go for. But the 1,000 Suns, there's more than 1,000 of these suckers. They're really annoying. Their lore is pretty cool. Magnus for sure did something wrong. He kind of did everything wrong. You do feel bad for him a little bit, but then I don't feel bad for him because when Sean plunks him on the table, it's just annoying. He's got the Eye of Magnus as his shooting weapon, which guess what? Deals mortal wounds. Not a fan. Not a fan of the Emperor of the 1,000 Suns. They're annoying, but that's okay because I don't collect them, Sean collects them. Although speaking of another army that Sean is tentatively collecting, he's played it a bunch in Tabletop Simulator, but I don't think he actually has any models for it yet. The World Eaters. I always want to say word bearers, but they're not the word bearers, they're the World Eaters. The Corn guys. Corn berserkers. These guys, these models are some of the best models that Games Workshop makes. They're really cool, they're really dynamic, they're really pointy and spiky. They were a few of these at the used shelf at my friendly local game store, so I picked them up and I painted this guy up. And though my only critique of the World Eaters is red and gold is fine, but to me it's not enough color. You want a little something else on there to really push them to the next level. And so I used a super saturated turquoise as the verdigris on all of the gold. Boom, to me, this instantly makes them so much more interesting. Adding that little bit of turquoise is weird. It's not quite cold, it's not quite warm. I guess it's a green, so it's technically a warm, but it really adds a ton. I also kind of let the red be a little bit pinker as opposed to a little bit more orangey. I really, really like how the color palette ended up on this guy. It was so much fun to paint. It was so much fun to do. I love how the model actually turned out. I'm not planning on starting a World Eater's army, but I do love me some Khorne Berserkers. And it's definitely not because Khorne Berserkers are basically just a Black Templars Crusader squad, but chaosified. It definitely has nothing to do with that. It's that they're awesome. Really, really like how spicy these guys turned out. But you don't technically always have to paint your Khorne Berserkers red. Sometimes you can paint them red, but with some other colors. I was really intrigued by the lore of the World Eaters and how they're not really a coherent faction anymore, and they're just a bunch of desperate warbands. And so I wanted to try out one of these other color schemes and other recipes. And so that brought me to the Blood Gorgons. I looked at some old Chaos artwork of the old wacky Chaos Space Marine models when they were pewter and metal. And so I actually I green stuff sculpted these shoulder pads to match that old school look. And then I did a little bit of kit bashing. He's got instead of a hand, he's just got a mess of cabling and tubes. And instead of just pure red, he's got orange and red going on. And I really like how he turned out. I also painted on a bunch of little hash marks so that he's counting up all of the different kills that he's made over the course of the last 10,000 years. But overall, I like him. I like him a lot, but I don't know if I like him more than my original Khorne Berserker recipe. And so these guys would look cool fighting each other. Bam. I do like the World Eaters aesthetically, but I don't like them play-wise because I already play Black Templars and they're kind of the same exact thing. And so if I was gonna do Chaos Space Marines, I would wanna do something very different to what I've already experienced. But speaking of experiences, this little sucker here is a Red Corsair. The Red Corsair are, in my opinion, the most interesting of the Chaos Space Marines lore-wise. I love the idea of a kind of modern interpretation of Space Marines who have fallen to chaos. They fell, was it the Bad Ab War? It might have been the Bad Ab War, but the Imperium was just so bad to Space Marines. Like they treated them so poorly that they went renegade because of how they were treated. I love it when the Imperium causes its own problems because of the way it chooses to be. That is 40K, like that is the idea of 40K. Everything is the worst possible version of what it could be, and that created the Red Corsairs. I love their lore, I love their different, Huron Blackheart is basically the foil to Abaddon the Despoiler, but he's actually a cool, interesting guy, where Abaddon the Armless he failed 12 Black Crusades. I feel like that says everything you need to know. Red Corsairs, really, really interesting in the lore. Their color scheme is cool with the red and then the kind of burnished brass backpacks. And it's a great opportunity to grab a bunch of Space Marine bits and put them onto your Chaos Space Marines because the Red Corsairs are a pirate legion or a pirate warband, and so they're always stealing. But I already collect Space Marines. I don't want to collect a red Space Marines that are the red baddie Space Marines. I don't know, it doesn't intrigue me in a way that would make me want to start an entire Chaos Space Marine army. But one thing that does intrigue me quite a bit is the Iron Warriors. Oh, the Iron Warriors. If you notice, I have 2 of them, and that is because I did an Iron Warriors video, and then I lost the footage of that video, and I waited hoping that footage would turn up. It was on an SD card, and that SD card is somewhere. It's somewhere around, but I don't know where. So eventually I gave up and I just redid the video, and I'm kind of glad I did because the Iron Warriors are a joy to paint. Dark gunmetal silver armor, it's the easiest thing in the world to paint, and then painting the hazard stripes is a really fun adventure in freehanding because you just gotta get lines that are reasonably straight. I can do lines that are decently straight. That's something I am capable of, and I am capable of making it look really, really good. And so the Iron Warriors, really fun to paint, really, really striking on the tabletop, really interesting lore. Peter Robo is actually one of the more interesting Primarchs in my opinion. He himself sucks, but I love the way he interacts with the world and the other Primarchs and his own legion, and how him being so atrocious affected everything in the worst way possible. I really like the Iron Warriors. And I've been thinking real hard because I feel like it's inevitable that I start a vanilla Chaos Space Marine army, but I've literally tried them all. There's plenty more, but Chaos Space Marines, a lot of the not quite successor chapters, but the other warbands are kind of just a very subtle color shift of their parent chapter. But if I was to collect Chaos Space Marines, like what is the correct decision for me in collecting a Chaos Space Marine army? I think the right decision is to not choose. In the Night Lords trilogy, there is a battle that takes place in which a bunch of different Space Marine or Chaos Space Marine warbands fight together. In fact, I believe in the 6th edition Chaos Space Marine Codex, you see some examples of different organizations of Chaos Space Marines all fighting together on one battlefield. If anybody has watched Mini Wargaming and seen Dave's massive Chaos Space Marine collection, it looks really cool to see the different colors represented in one scene. I think the right decision might be to just get a Chaos Space Marine box and paint it up based on what would look the best, what would be the most fun. It would make total sense in the lore. It would look really, really cool on the tabletop. Now I'm kind of thinking like, I really want warp talons. I have this idea in my head of warp talons with creepy butterfly wings. Like they're actually in a way beautiful, but also evil. And that is got Emperor's Children pink written all over it. But then I really like raptors, or not warp talons, not raptors, havocs, the Devastator Chaos Space Marines, and just a bunch of big, heavy Space Marines with big, heavy guns. That's Iron Warriors. That is the Iron Warriors. They would look their best as Iron Warriors. And then if I wanted to ally in like a squad of Khorne Berserkers, you just paint them like Khorne Berserkers. And then maybe leading the charge would be Abaddon the Despoiler, leading a squad of Black Legion, Chaos not possessed, Chaos, what is the name of Chaos Space Marines? Legionaries, but they're like the one step above. I think it is chosen. I'm not super up on my Chaos Space Marine knowledge, but I'm digging back to a buddy of mine in high school who collected Chaos Space Marines, and I did read all of the Chaos Space Marine codexes, but I didn't read them with my collector brain turned on. I just read them with my lore brain turned on. But if I was going to collect some Chaos Space Marines, I think the way I would do it is just paint up every single box in the color scheme that best represents that box. I mean, the Disco Lord on Super Drake, that would look so cool in the Iron Warriors. Doing a Chaos Space Marine army like that would give me some amazing modeling and painting opportunities. And speaking of modeling and painting, there's a lot of modeling and painting goodness available from EonsBattle.com. EonsBattle.com is a place to find all sorts of hobby goodies like wet palettes, water slide decals, basing toppers, and bits. And we got some new hobby goodies in there. We got my favorite cork that I like to use on all of my basing, and we got my favorite Rosemary & Co. brushes. And EonsBattle.com is the best way to support us doing what we do with a membership. Each month, members get a credit that they can use on our new monthly trade packs or any previous pack we have ever made. Come celebrate Orktober with us and head on down to the Orc Rodeo. A whimsical assortment of high-octane hijinks, this set includes a series of walls and barricades that not only create a coliseum of chaos, but also fits in with our previous orky wall terrains. Then there's the Goblin Game Carts, a series of mobile orc entertainments pulled along by an orcified food truck, literally dripping with some good orc grub. Rounding out this set are the three amigos, some brave goblins riding their violently bucking steeds. All this terrain was designed by us and is available at EonsBattle.com. Let me know in the comments below, what do you guys think of Chaos Space Marines? I have videos painting up all of these suckers. And I think if I had to pick a winner, I mean, it's also the most recent ones that I painted, but I really, really had a good time with the Iron Warriors. But also, does anybody do that idea of chaos where you just paint them based on what you're feeling that day or what the kit is calling for, and then just call it like a conglomerate of Chaos Space Marines? Because that is often how they're represented in the lore, but usually on a tabletop, I see them a little bit more closely resembling Space Marine chapters where you've got all Alpha Legion or all Iron Warriors or all Red Corsairs. But I don't know, I'm really tempted by just doing it however I want and calling it good. Thanks for watching.